Once upon a time, there lived a community of bacteria inside a human body. They lived inside the stomach of a man called Danny Max. They were highly developed microbes, and a wise king ruled their kingdom called Cactus the Great. He was a just king who loved all things scientific. One day, Cactus the Great decided to organize a major scientific conference at the Great Hall of Learning overlooking his kingdom's palace. He asked his Minister of Culture to send out invitations to all the universities in his kingdom to participate in a major scientific conference being held by the king on the 10th day of the Lu month. The king instructed his minister to make known to all that the agenda and purpose of the conference would be to pool together all the different scientific studies and research being done by his kingdom's scholars and scientists that sought to explain the origins of life. On the 10th of Lu month, the king of bacteria, Cactus the Great, opened the grand scientific gathering at the Great Hall of Learning. The king brought together the greatest minds and scientists of his day in his kingdom under one roof. The first speakers of this grand gathering were the biologists. In their presentation, the microbiologists gave a graphic description of the molecular and genetic makeup of their kind. They showcased their groundbreaking discoveries concerning the DNA of their microbial cells, the structure of the plasma membrane, and how the cell wall absorbs nutrients and proteins abundant in their natural habitat, Danny's stomach. Meanwhile, Danny, the man whose stomach housed the kingdom of bacteria, was on sick leave and is on his way to see his doctor. He told his doctor that he's been suffering from acute stomach pains for the last 2 days. His doctor said that he believed this might be due to food poisoning and prescribed him 3 days of powerful antibiotic medication to be taken in between meals. As soon as Danny got home, he took his medication and for the rest of the day stayed in bed with an upset stomach. Meanwhile, back in the Grand Microbial Conference, as soon as the biologists wrapped up their scientific presentation, they were given a standing ovation by all. No sooner had the dust settled and all was quiet again in the Great Hall, the king stood up and announced that he just received news about powerful antibiotic agents making their way into the furthest corners of their microbe kingdom. He said these antibiotic compounds are similar to past incursion outbreaks, and neutralizing the invading pathogens' contaminants against the kingdom's colonies shouldn't be a problem for our hardened defense forces. After reassuring the startled conference, Cactus the Great went on to introduce the next scientific speakers. They were the physicists, the learned men and women of the subatomic world of particles. The microscopic physicists described in their presentation the subatomic particles forming their creed and world, and how they relate and function with each other. They gave numerous scientific facts and figures, which explained the fundamental forces governing subatomic particles to vibrate and emit all forms of energy into organic matter. They said, "We have detected a rhythmic electromagnetic pulse averaging 72 cycles per minute that we believe binds every subatomic particle in our universe together, and that it has the very same rhythmic electromagnetic pulse, 72 beats per minute, that pulsates in every river, channel, and ocean of ours, Danny's blood arteries vessels." Furthermore, the physicists said that they believed they had located the source from which this pulsating phenomenon originates. They said that according to the latest data received from their unmanned probe, which is now traversing the outermost regions of their bacterial world, the pulsating magnetic field is coming from an unknown region, i.e. Danny's chest, far beyond their world. As the physicists wrapped up their presentation, a great blanket of silence engulfed the Great Hall. There was no jubilation from the conferencegers, just a blank deafening silence ended along with their presentation. Then the king stood up and emphatically clapped, jeering bravo. All of a sudden, the entire conference began clapping and hailing the physicists for their presentation. When all the commotion died down, the king, still standing, commented that the idea of a unifying force being responsible for all life hadn't gone down well, with most of his honored guests of academia attending his conference. The king then asked the physicists whether this confirms the existence of a supreme being. They replied, "No, your majesty," and said, according to our data, this unknown source, Danny's heart, which is responsible for generating this electric pulsating magnetic field, does not appear to exhibit any forms of intelligence. The physicists of bacteria, nonetheless, gave the king their scientific belief that if this unknown source were to stop emitting this pulsating, life-giving energy, all life would cease to exist in their universe. The next speakers in the conference, to be introduced by Cactus the Great, were the anthropologists. The anthropologists addressed the question of whether a single primordial source can be traced back to the origins of all life. They emphatically debunked this notion against all the scientific records available at hand, particularly in the fossil record, which they declared proves that this notion is nothing more than an old-fashioned fable inherited from their ancestral, spirit-worshipping forefathers. As the anthropologists continued to give their talk, they were abruptly interrupted by the king, who excused himself for intruding into their presentation and asked, "What will all this mean concerning our long-time held belief, taught by our finest scientist in the field of biology and the natural sciences, that our universe, i.e. Danny's stomach, all came about by a mere chance of coincidence and pure luck?" The king then extended his arm out towards the physicists for an answer. Perplexed by the king's query, the physicists looked at one another and remarked to the king, "Maybe the biologists can give us some insight into this question, Your Majesty." As the biologists were about to give their response, the king, gesturing to the biologists to be seated, said, "I will tell you what this means. It means something far greater than what we had perceived before is responsible for our existence." The king continued, "For it has been scientifically proven to us today in this grand and historic scientific conference of ours that there is a unifying force of energy that binds us and our environment together. It's without any doubt, well, for me at least, there is no doubt," said King Cactus, "that this source could be the fundamental cause responsible for our existence and the world as we know it." The king then commented, "Maybe our high priests, the keepers of our ancestral spiritual faith, can help us fathom this fantastic new scientific discovery of ours." He looked around the great hall and noticed that there were no high priests of the kingdom present at the conference. Then the king asked his minister of culture, who was seated by his side, "Where are the kingdom's high priests?" The minister replied, "They were not invited to the conference, your sire." The king said, "Why on earth not?" "Because this is a scientific gathering, and you didn't invite them, your sire," replied the minister. The king then told his minister to summon the kingdom's high priests immediately. On their arrival, the high priests of the kingdom of Bacteria quickly were ushered into the great hall and brought to the front row of the grand conference to be seated. The king briefed the high priests about this latest scientific discovery on the pulsating phenomenon as the possibility that it was the life-giving force of energy for all living things. King Cactus then asked the high priests whether this pulsating phenomenon was the old-fashioned great spirit of the Creator, i.e. the human soul, which the kingdom's ancestral fathers used to worship in the old days. The high priests replied, "No, your majesty, it isn't." "Why not?" asked the king. "Because this pulsating phenomenon is a finite entity, sire," answered the high priests. "So what if it's finite?" the king remarked. "Because this phenomenon, your sire," said the high priests, "possesses a physical form, which resides in a definite place of abode, a locality. And once a thing has a locality, it means it is subject to the laws of time, motion, and space." "Furthermore, your sire," said the high priests, "we mustn't forget our bacterial ancestors worshipped the great spirit of the Creator, that neither had a form nor was confined to a particular time, space, or dimension," the high priests explained. "I don't understand," said the king. The high priests then said to the king, "Your Majesty, take, for example, this great hall of learning. Which came first, the hall or the land it's built on?" The king replied, "Well, the land came first, of course." "There you have it, sire," the high priests replied. "Had this land not existed here, there would be no great hall. Because this pulsating phenomenon is said to be situated somewhere in another locality beyond our worldly jurisdiction, it therefore means, your sire, that the locality must have existed before this pulsating phenomenon ever had the chance to manifest itself into any form or being," advised the high priests. "Well, if this pulsating magnetic phenomenon discovered by our finest scientific minds isn't what our ancestors used to worship as the great spirit of the Creator, what the hell then is it?" retorted the king. "It's simply just another natural phenomenon, material world we are living in, sire," replied the high priests. King Cactus then sarcastically asked the high priests, "Okay, if this is the case, tell me, where is this great spirit of the Creator that our forefathers worshipped eons ago then?" "I.e. the human soul," the high priest said. It's everywhere and all around us, your sire. Is that so? Then tell me why the hell we can't see it, said the king mockingly, bringing the entire conference into rapturous laughter. Unamused by all this, the high priests asked the king, "Can we ask you a question, your majesty?" "Go ahead, be my guests," replied the king, stifling a giggle at the same time. "When we die, what happens to us, if we may query you, sire?" said the high priests. "We rot," yelled out the king with a great burst of humorous laughter. "Very true, your majesty, but seriously, something we possess when alive goes from us when we die. Call it spirit, soul, or consciousness. Is this not so, your sire?" said the high priests. "That's correct," replied the king. "Then why can't we see and touch this spirit, soul, or consciousness that we possess when we are alive, and become dispossessed of it when we die? Can we claim that this spirit, soul, or consciousness is located in a particular part of our bacterial body? The answer is no, sire. In all truths, all we can say is that our physical body is the direct and physical manifestation of this spirit, soul, or consciousness of ours. Hence, in like manner, the great spirit of the Creator, worshipped eons ago by our forefathers of bacteria, is present everywhere and all around us, sire," conveyed the high priests to the king. King Cactus, taken aback by the high priest's wisdom, thanked them for their eloquent discourse. The king then invited the high priests to explain how this ancient knowledge of theirs was acquired in antiquity without having any modern scientific and technical knowledge of any sort. The high priest's reply was, "To know the unknown, sire, all one must do is to study one's inner self, consciousness, and its outer bodily manifestation, to appreciate the miraculous nature of our universe, i.e. Danny's stomach. Please elaborate on this," the king asked the high priests. "As we all know, your majesty," the high priest said, "the microbial kind has a conscious mind as well as a physical body. To an extent, we can say that the physical expression of our conscious mind is manifested through our brain and body. But the spiritual manifestation of our conscious mind is something far removed from the physical nature of this material world that we live in. In other words, sire, everything that exists out there in this universe is imprinted in us. Our physical body and its internal workings are like a mirror image of the cosmos. This is why we say, 'As above, so below, too, sire,'" concluded the high priests. The king thanked again the high priests for their ancient wisdom and announced that the conference would break for lunch and return in the afternoon after a 2-hour adjournment. However, on that very fateful afternoon, in the wake of the devastating onslaught by the powerful antibiotic agents, the once thriving kingdom of bacteria lay in ruins. The microbial colonies, led by their wise ruler King Cactus, had valiantly fought against the invading antibiotic agents, but their efforts proved futile against the overwhelming force of Danny's antibiotic medication. As the sun set on the fateful day, Danny, unaware of the tragic fate of the microbial kingdom's destruction within his own body, prepared his last dose for the day of the antibiotic medication his doctor prescribed in the morning and ventured out into the town with his friends. His stomach, now relieved of the microbial inhabitants that had once thrived within it, no longer plagued him with discomfort. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the kingdom's demise, the great hall of learning stood silent and empty, a stark contrast to the bustling scientific conference that had taken place earlier in the day. The profound discussions on the origins of life and the nature of existence now seemed like distant echoes in the empty hall. In the quiet of the evening, as Danny enjoyed his meal with friends, the mysteries of the universe remained unanswered. The questions raised during the conference lingered in the minds of its surviving attendees, even as the kingdom itself faded into oblivion. And so, as night fell and the world continued to turn, life carried on its eternal dance of creation and destruction, leaving behind only whispers of the wisdom once shared within the walls of the great hall of learning.